User Experience with Jessica Engström.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host, for helping you and your teams move fast, deliver quality, and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything the .NET ecosystem has to offer. The podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software architecture company that empowers .NET teams to be self-sufficient and able to deliver world-class results. And they are hiring architects and also .NET engineers who'd like a path to become an architect. So you can go to clearmeasure.com/careers to find out more. And then finally, be sure to check out the new video show, Architect Tips. My guest today on the show is Jessica Engström, and she is an international speaker, teacher, podcaster, mentor, geek, and the CEO of her own company. One of her passions is the developer community, where she organizes conferences and events and streams and runs multiple user groups. And she's also the co-host of the Coding After Work podcast and Twitch channel. And she started out in development and soon realized it was the user experience and interaction that really excited her. And one thing that she's sure of is that you can never learn enough. And that's why she's continuously learning new things, researching and trains some of the best people in the world, and does trainings and workshops in UX and Scrum and voice UI and speaker skills and machine learning with cognitive services and tons of other things. So excited, Jessica, to have you on the show. How are you?
I'm doing good. Wow, I keep busy.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, if I find a passion, I just go for it, I guess.
That's awesome. Now, there's plenty of people here that listen to your podcast and the other Twitch channels and presentations and are familiar with you. But for the people that are just meeting you for the first time, give us some of your background and what things led up to you doing all this stuff.
Absolutely. So I'm Jessica Engström. I live in Sweden, and I am a Windows developer MVP because I keep busy in the industry, I guess, in the community. I started out actually learning development and starting out in the developer world, but I think it was about when Windows Phone was announced. It wasn't out, it was just announced.
Man, when was that?
I think it's almost going on 20 years now or something. It's insane. Or is it 10 years? More like 10, right?
Well, let's see. Windows Mobile was around in 2005, but then iPhone came out in 2007. So was it after
Then I
07?
think it's around 2010 or somewhere around there. So, okay, 10 years then. Well, but what happened was my mom, I should say, she's very not technical, or she was very not technical. And I'm saying that in a very nice way. She was really not technical. But when Windows Phone came around, that was her first smartphone. And then later Windows 8, which had a similar user experience. It was very clear to her that if she pressed the camera button, the huge camera button, she understood that would take a picture. Or if she pressed on the large envelope, she would send an email. So it was something clicked when I saw how my mom went from being super untechnical to now she's running multiple Facebook groups. She has group chats, and she lives online. She is actually one of our frequent visitors to our streams.
Oh, nice.
That's what happened, and that's all thanks to that new design language that got introduced at the same time as Windows Phone, and of course Google and Apple and everyone else has a similar way. So when that happened, something clicked in my head, and all of a sudden I realized that I want to give that experience to other people. I want to take someone's pain and I don't know, frustrations, and make them better. And I kind of just went into UX.
Well, you run the or you're one of the co-hosts of the Coding After Work podcast and streaming, and you do UX work, and you're a Windows developer MVP. What all does that entail? What does that all mean?
Yeah, so in Sweden we have a lot of user groups. Well, if we if we take it back a few years when we didn't have a pandemic in the world, we have a lot of user groups for developers, which is awesome, and we get to learn all these new things. And sometimes we don't have, or I should say, we don't take the time to actually uh, try it out, or the boss you're having says, well, we can't just switch framework, so you're not allowed to try that on at work. And at home you have another life, so maybe you have kids, that so you don't take the time there, or you don't have the opportunity to do that. So what we did was a code heavy user group. So we started up, so you have a place and time where you can come, few hours, try whatever you want to try out, or work on your projects, or just sit and code with other people who also know how to code, and everybody helps out. So we started that so we can actually catch all that goodness we get from the other meetups, right? So we started out there and we did hackathons, and uh, with the pandemic, we moved to Twitch and YouTube, and the podcast came from that user group as well, because seeing the both me and my husband Jimmy's speakers, we got the opportunity to meet so many interesting people in the developer community, and we wanted to share those chats that we had, so we recorded them, and there was the podcast.
That's all it
So
takes.
now, yeah, it's one place, and it just sparked all of this. So right now we're rebuilding our webpage in Blazor from scratch. So we're doing the whole thing. We have sprints; they are 90 minutes long, and we are doing the design, the planning, the coding, and looking into some user experience and accessibility.
Nice, nice. So there are plenty of developers out there that when they hear user experience, and of course when Microsoft uses the word experience kind of as a synonym for just feature or the visible or part of a feature, and everyone seems to talk about it in a different way still today in the industry.
Yeah.
So how do you, when you talk about user experience and the part that really in your mind is missing or needs to be broadly educated, how do you describe it? What's the essence?
Yeah, it's interesting that UX as a subject has a UX issue. It's basically
Yeah,
what it
yeah,
is.
good point.
But I think the problem is that we have roles that are called UX designer, and we're used to designer being the ones that does Photoshop stuff and front end stuff.
Make it
And
pretty.
yeah, exactly. For me, I think that everything has a UI. No matter if it's good looking or not, it's a UI, and everything has an experience, how the user reacts to whatever your application is, or what happens when they press the button. Can they even see the button? But UX as a topic, it is humongous. It's everything from data architecture to psychology, and I think that is part of the problem, that it's so big. It's kind of, if you're not in UX, um, it's too big. So it's kind of fluffy. But I think everything has a UX. If it's good or bad, Someone swears when they're trying to find your button, you have a bad UX. If someone finds your button and doesn't think twice about it, you have a good UX.
Does it have to be visible to be user experience?
No, it does not. But it might have to be visible to be a good UX. So remember Windows 8 when it just came out, Windows 8, I think it was the first 8, not 8.1.
Okay.
They introduced the charms bar.
Oh yeah, swipe from the left or the right.
Exactly. Swipe from the right in towards your computer, or hover with your mouse button up in the top right corner or lower right corner, I believe. But that was invisible. And since nobody was used to having that there, nobody knew it. My mom did, though, because she was the one person who actually watched the tutorial on
Right.
Welcome to Windows. This is what we have. But if you have used Windows before or was at least semi used to computers, you didn't watch that, did you? I didn't.
Yeah.
So then you might have missed it. But again, Visual Studio, imagine not having any keyboard shortcuts. That wouldn't be great for you, would it?
No way.
So invisible can be good, but there needs to be at least some perceptible way for the user to understand how to perform that. So in Visual Studio, you could go up in the menu and try to find what you're doing, or you can use the keyboard shortcuts.
Mm-hmm. So what's your methodology then? People saying, okay, hey, UX good. I like UX. Let me use UX. Is there a framework? Is there a curriculum? How do they educate, get started, and put it in their process?
Yeah, it's complicated. For me, I would say you can't just add UX, because no matter if you thought about it or not, you still have an experience. No matter if I'm not going to do UX, well, you still have a UX. The way I'm using your product is what I'm experiencing as a user. But there are a lot of information about UX. I mean, we have actually been researching this for over 100 years. Granted,
Really?
most of those, but most of them might not have been for the tech community, like digital interfaces, but most of the stuff is still the same thing. How you open a door or how you press a button, it's kind of this similar way in our behaviors. And there are different UX laws and rules and stuff that you can look up and understand. Like there's proximity that we can learn about, so we don't have those forms when we don't know if I press this button, is the title to the left or the right of it. You know those forms, which I mean, when you don't really know which radio button goes to what label. So you can use proximity and move things around. But my absolute favorite UX system, or UI system, if you will, is called Tenets and Traps, because they have boiled everything down to a deck of cards. And it's using regular English, like day-to-day English. And there's even an example of the problem in the real world. So they have 9 good things, 9 tenets that we want to achieve, like understandable. We want the user to understand. And then we have traps that will degrade those good things. So if we remove the traps, the UX will improve. So that's one option. And there are tons of books and blogs, and Instagram is a good way as well. They post, there's a lot of accounts that post daily tidbits on how you can improve your UX. So there's no one framework that you can just add this and it will all be good. You need to think about the user behind, because if you put in the button, there's no way you will miss the button, right? Because you know where it is. So you can't really try your own UI and be the user, because the user might not find the button.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting.
Many thanks to our podcast sponsor, ClearMeasure. ClearMeasure is a software architecture company that empowers clients' development teams to be self-sufficient, moving fast, delivering quality, and running their systems with confidence. Whether starting a new project or developing new technologies or techniques, ClearMeasure sets up your team to deliver world-class results. Learn more at www.clearmeasure.com. ClearMeasure, empowering software delivery.
So it reminds me of some of these pop-up dialogues or forms, and every once in a while I go to the bottom right, and then I realize, wait a minute, I just hit the cancel button. They put the go button to the left and the cancel button to the right, whereas other people put the cancel button on the left and the go button on the right.
Exactly. And that's also a great tip, actually. If there is a standard, stick to it, because your UX will improve if you follow standards, because the user have already learned those standards. Like, you knew that if I press the right button, I will submit something. But turns out this person had switched them around. And I think that comes from, I believe that Apple and Windows have them reversed, the cancel OK buttons, if I'm not mistaken. So if there's a standard, go for it. It will you won't have to teach your users how to use your application.
Has anyone compiled, and maybe it's not standard, as in it's obviously not law or but has anyone compiled the guidance and just a set of lists? Like, how can we teach new developers the rules of thumb?
That there would be the tenets and traps, I would say, because there's, I don't know, 150 something UX laws and rules, and that is a lot to try to, especially as a developer, where we might not have the fortune of sitting down and learning new stuff that's not work related or developer related. So yeah. Another thing you could do to improve your UX is actually start thinking about accessibility, because there we have just such lists as you describe. Because accessibility is not for disabled people only, it's for including a lot of users. So if we start thinking about accessibility as a way of improving our UX, we will improve it for even more people. So we will get the accessibility and the improved UX for free, so to say.
That's a good term that needs defining as well, because I think that everyone has seen the Windows team's accessibility projects over time with colorblind people or people who don't have 10 fingers to use a full keyboard and are using an alternate keyboard. And then, of course, we have the screen readers for blind people. But holistically, how should accessibility be defined for people who really haven't even looked into it?
I think, just as you said, sometimes we tend to stop at, well, accessibility is for the ones who don't have all 10 fingers or amputated an arm or whatever it is. But I see it more like an inclusive way of developing your stuff. Because if, for instance, you mentioned color blindness, it's not only the people who have color blindness that will benefit from having good contrast and color combinations on your web page. Myself, I have glasses, and if it's dark, I see a little bit worse. I'm getting older, so my ability to see in the dark isn't the best nowadays, which means I will also benefit from that. So there's a lot of, I think we need to let go of the whole accessibility is only for disabled people. I think we need to think more like just including more people, because if we I mentioned the amputated arm. We think that, well, our application, we don't have any people who have an amputated arm. No, you don't. But you might have someone who broke their arm, or you might have someone who just got a baby, which means one of your arms is busy holding the baby.
Right.
So it rendered you one-handed. So all of a sudden, we're not just excluding one person, we're excluding a lot of people. And if we include all of them, the one person who actually have the amputated arm will also benefit so much from us thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's not people who have permanently different ways to use a computer, but temporarily different ways to use a computer.
Yeah, as well. Of course, we should do it for everybody, but sometimes our brain works in a way that it's hard to motivate, or our boss for that matter. It's hard to motivate if it's just not even 1% of your user base. But it isn't. It's often so many more.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the seeing in the dark, and that reminded me. So many of these applications are jumping on these dark themes, and they're changing the main to some dark gray. Whether it's my eyes or not, I find it so difficult to read text in a lot of these dark themes that it makes a change, and I have to go change it back just to be able to see it and move around as quickly as I was used to.
Exactly. And I think we should do stuff like, for the web, for instance, we have media queries where we can set prefer dark theme or prefer light theme, which means for you, if you come to my site, you will always get your preference. You will always get the light theme. But for me, maybe I like the dark theme, I will always get that one. So we have the choice. At least have a setting, I would say, because, and it also depends on how they do dark theme, because if we use white text, like pure white text on pure black background, you will read the text like a minute after, because it will follow your eyes around, kind of like when you look into the flash when you take a photo, right?
Gotcha.
Because it's too much contrast.
Mm-hmm.
That type of contrast is, I think it's 21:1. Which is a lot. And it's, of course, it's the same if you reverse it and you have black text on white, but it's easier for the eyes, and you can just lower the contrast or the brightness on your screen. I prefer to put my dark themes at around 15:1 when it comes to the contrast. And contrast is actually the number one accessibility failure we have on the web. 86% of all web pages have many low contrast fails on their web page. There's WebAIM, or Web Accessibility in Mind. They do an accessibility analysis of the top 1 million web pages every year. And they have so much interesting data. Like, for instance, the 86% of all pages fail in low contrast text. But the second most common problem we have is missing alternative text for images. So please use alt text on your images, and do not just call them image, because that will not help anyone.
Right.
So that's 60% of all pages have a missing alt text in their images. That's a lot.
Yeah. WebAIM has been doing this for a long time.
They have. And they do an amazing job. Actually, I think 97% of all the most common errors, the accessibility errors, are just 6 categories. So if you just focus on a handful of them, imagine how much better the accessibility of your webs would be.
Mm-hmm.
And of
Yeah.
course, this is guidelines for web accessibility, but most of it's the same when you're doing applications.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out. They have actually a whole section for developers, so you can see what tools there are, frameworks, what have you. They have so much stuff that we can use.
Right. You know, man, I'm just popping up their website. I haven't gone to their website in a number of years, but they even have surveys of people that use alternative computer, whether it be screen readers or keyboards or mice. This is a
Yeah.
wealth of information.
Yeah. And it's
I
so
remember using
interesting.
the Wave toolbar, and I don't know if they've kept it update, but it was a toolbar add-in that just you click a button and it basically popped up and annotated the problems that it saw
Yeah.
on a web interface.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff, and definitely check out the developer the developer page that they have with a lot of resources.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if we can fix our accessibility, we will get a better UX for most people.
Yeah. One thing that I remember a project where uh, screen reader compatibility was a requirement,
Yeah.
and we noticed a high correlation between screen reader bugs and lack of full system tests that entered the application through the user interface. And what we found was using the page object model or explicitly wrapping and naming elements in order to get a test handle to do UI testing, automated UI testing through the browser, was the same work to making that element screen reader compatible.
Mm.
And how we got both dual benefit from it.
Yeah.
So that came back to my mind.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this for a long time. For people who are kind of intrigued by the conversation and really want to learn more, we've talked about tenets and traps. We've talked about WebAIM. What other resources or texts or curriculums can we point people to kind of immerse themselves in this?
Medium has if you search for UX on Medium, the blog platform, you will get so many good blog posts as well, and they're easily consumed, so you don't have to like study all of them, but they have a lot of cool stuff. Same with Instagram. If you search for UX there, you can find so many tips and tricks, like UX tip of the day, or is it better to have the button on the left or the right? And then they show you whether it's better on the left or the right. Um, those I highly recommend because it's not difficult to consume,
Okay.
but you still get a lot of good information.
Let me ask you a question about these CSS frameworks, Material UI and Bootstrap. Do you think of that just as theme or look and feel, or do they have some UX standards embedded when you choose one of those?
You probably get some, but you also get some issues.
Okay.
So I actually just got rid of Bootstrap because it was unmanageable to have 22,000 rows of CSS when I just wanted to change that background color one time. So we're doing now pure CSS or just CSS on the webpage we are trying to build on Stream. But definitely you get some help. But sometimes you also don't because someone wanted that, or we have always done it this way, or whatever it could be. So you still need to test your web and see if it's actually making sense.
Okay. How should people think differently between HTML UIs and Windows or native or mobile? Or should they be thinking about it the same way?
I think there's a lot of overlap. Um, it's all coming down to, will the user find it? Will the user be frustrated or not? Is it easy to use? Can you see it? Is there contrast? So there's so much overlap. But when it comes to the web, HTML and stuff, it's important that we use the correct tags, that we use the correct element. Like headers, we use an H1. Subheaders, we use an H2. It's better to restyle it so everything looks the same, but still use the tags, because things like screen readers and other help devices will pick up on that this is a header, which might not be visible if you just style them inline or use a div or just text. So it's more important to use the standard or correct elements in HTML than it is on Windows, because we don't really have that the same way.
The H1 tag, that reminded me of components and subcomponents or individual articles. If we're authoring something that might be part of a page, do we use H1 because in that area it's the header, or do we say, wait a minute, that page or the layout might already used H1, so I need to avoid using H1?
Yeah.
What's your opinion there?
Me personally, I would use an H2 or an H3. I usually only use this is a personal preference, I should say. I usually use H1, like for instance, if I have a blog, that's the title of the blog. That's my H1. Then I have, for the article, I might have an H2. And then if I have subheaders in that article, I would use an H3. And like you said, you might already have been using that. So that's exactly what you should be thinking about. Just take a step back, breathe. Am I using H1? Is there a risk of confusing this or not? That's how you improve your UX.
All right. Well, awesome. We'll include all of the links to the resources that we talked about in the show notes, and so that anything we talked about, listeners, you can jump over to the show notes and get those URLs. And also, Jessa, where can people find you?
On Engström Jess in most social media and .com.
Okay. We'll include that as well.
Trying to make it simple.
That's right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the Azure DevOps Podcast and talking with us about user experience.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.